That's what I'm talking about. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Arvanauts, to a Saturday stream. It is March 2nd, 2019. It is 6:30 p.m. Eastern, and I hope everyone is doing well and is looking forward to some awesome tabletop stuff going on tonight, beginning with Masters of the Dungeon. Technically, this is ending up February, because technically this was supposed to happen in February, but we couldn't schedule it until now. So we are going to have another Masters of the Dungeon late in March, hopefully in March, but this is going to technically finish up February's streams, I guess, basically, you could say, with our Masters of the Dungeon show, and it's going to be awesome, and I can't wait. But before I get to that, just a couple of reminders about things, ways to support the stream. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to follow the channel. That is always appreciated. Please make sure to check out the YouTube channel with !ArvTube, the Discord with !ArvCord. Please make sure to tweet out this stream as well. !Tweet will let you retweet the stream. What's up, Light and Passion? !ArvTweets will let you join my Twitter, which would be much appreciated, of course. !ArvShop will allow you to get over to my merchandise area where you can pick out wow. Exclamation point. All of a sudden, my daughter is playing with a friend, and I was like, wow, stuff is going on out there. Anyway, exclamation point, Arv Shop for the merchandise area, where you can get stuff from Infinity and Beyond, which you will hear more of this evening. And then, of course, exclamation point, Arvtreon. That's the Patreon. What's up, Polar? That is $372.96, hoping that we can move that up past 400 and on to 420, which is the goal for the end of the year. Again, cool stuff for you, cool stuff for the channel, the ability to inspire players, get copies of one of my band's albums, get writing critiques, epic character backgrounds written of you, all that kind of good stuff. And the last thing, of course, is that sub button right above that video window that allows you to use some of our custom emotes. We're going to have another couple emotes coming thanks to Twitch broadening the affiliate program, plus this custom sub badges as well. So you can get those also if you jump on board with subbing. So thank you to all of those. We want to get back up to and then past 40 and keep on rising as we move up to try to get to our goal towards the end of the year. Quick note about schedule. So Masters of the Dungeon is going on now. Roughly speaking, at about 8 p.m. Eastern, we will close up shop on this, and we will get ready for D&D with Infinity and Beyond as we continue with Curse of Strahd. That's going to be awesome, and we'll be doing that tonight. Then next week is going to be a little up in the air early on, because there is a possibility that we will have an Espergenesis session earlier than normal. It will be on a Monday, because I'm on spring break next week, and in terms of fitting it in, that may be the only thing we can do to fit in a second Espergenesis session. So that might be happening on Monday. Tuesday will be our normal set of streams with starting out with, I think I'm doing just maybe Bard's Tale, something like that. I don't exactly remember because I know that AME is happening Thursday, the following two Tuesdays, and then the Gamebook illustrations the last Tuesday. But I think that next Tuesday is just going to be sort of video game stuff, and then I'll be over playing playing Thronebreaker on my Pen and Pixel show on GOG. And then later on in the week, we will have more stuff happening with things like the Adventures of Middle-earth and Espergenesis and stuff like that happening over the course of the weekend. So it should be a good time. I'm excited about it. It's going to be fun, and I hope everyone is ready for that. And the last thing that I want to mention as I get rid of this, and I get rid of, where are we, this. The last thing that I want to mention here is also, is also my webcam. There we go. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Hope everyone's doing well. And the other thing that I wanted to mention here, which was important, was this thing, which is that thing right over there. That thing right there. Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, which is the Kickstarter, is being run to support this by Alligator Alley Entertainment. They're the folks who did Espergenesis, of course, that runs on my channel, and they will be publishing this. This is coming out later this month, March 19th, is going to be the start date of this Kickstarter, and then it's going to be running until April 19th. And so I hope that people will be able to learn more about this. It's an adventure and a source book. Super excited about it. A lot of stuff that's going on with it, and it will be officially launched on this channel on Tuesday, March 19th. In about 2.5 to 3 weeks from now. So it's going to be awesome, and I'm excited, and I will not keep talking about it today, but I just want to talk about it because I'm excited and all those things. So that is going to be that, and now I'm going to unmute myself so that the folks know that we're ready to go, and then I'm going to unmute them so they can actually hear, you can hear all of them when I go over there, and last but certainly not least, I will bring us over to the wonderful Smiling Crew, which one of whom has not been running around crazily and streaming all day and did not just change costumes for this affair. that isn't what happened. But it is my great pleasure to welcome two people to the stream. One, of course, who is one of the regulars, and one, of course, who is a guest star. So I will begin, first of all, by saying hello to Dot, who is one of the regulars on Masters of the Dungeon. Hi, Dot. How are you? And yeah, is it
Great.
true that you have not had any work up to this? This is just a very chill day, like no
Yeah, I
streaming.
just actually crawled out of bed.
Yeah.
When I look like this when I crawl out of bed, and two, yeah, it's been one of those kind of days. So it's fine. It's fine. I think I'm going on I'm on hour like 8 now.
Jeez.
It's fine. It's gonna be fine.
This
I
is
have
when
a
she's
lot
best,
to
though.
do.
At hour 8 is when she hits, that's when she hits the newest
Punchy.
gear. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. And I've been streaming all day, so at least I can offer some insight.
Yeah, no, it's true. It'll be great. And you should follow Dot on all of the awesome, amazing things that she is doing, of course. And is there anything in particular that you want to just particularly, promote at the moment, Dot, that you're doing? Like, definitely come see this by me on my show for this.
Yeah, well, I'll do something I'm DMing versus playing it, because I'm doing a lot of playing right now, but that's kind of shifting. So I'm actually GMing a game over on Pro Restarter's channel right now that I've completely fallen in love with, called The Little Things, which is, it's D&D, but I've added a layer of basically everybody plays adolescence. So it's a view of what Faerun is from the world of like kids, and kind of this satirical look actually at what it means to be a kid in a world where adventurers don't notice you, and there are a lot of things that go unnoticed, and what does it mean to start as a 0 level character and gain your rank as an adventurer.
Nice.
They basically started without a class and had to choose a class, and in doing so, of course, they're like called to adventure and all that jazz. But the cast I have is just stellar, and I was really afraid that like the extreme amount of imagery that I layered into it would just like go over most people's head, and people are eating it up, and it's turned into one of my favorite campaigns I've ever written and DM'd, which was not not the plan when I started it. So it's been really cool. So there are 3 sessions of that out. You can go check out. It's called The Little Things.
Nice. Well, see, there you go. That clearly proves that you should be checking it out. I was getting pumped up just listening to it. For some reason, it was reminding me of like Days of Future Past, kind of like X-Men Academy type of stuff,
Yeah,
almost
kind of
like
a thing. Yeah, that's I'm drawing a lot from I drew a lot from Zelda, actually. This idea of like you start as this just kid. You just have your kid. You don't know any better or any different. Plus, it's also been really interesting to see all the different races, because in D&D, a lot of people don't. Everybody's always in the same like bracket. Everybody's in their like middle-aged life, wherever that is, in most races. And this time, like, we've got a human, which is 16, which means he's 16, but like a 16-year-old gnome is like totally different. So there's this like concept of age, and I've inlaid a piece of innocence as well. There's an innocence bar, and when they do things that are adult, like killing stuff, the innocence bar goes down. And so at what point do you shift from being a child to having like your innocence taken from you?
It's like a metaphor for all existence. This is
it's
like
exactly, and it's turned
what
into
we
this
do.
like existential thing with them,
Oh
which
my
is why
God.
I've really enjoyed it. So
My innocence is lost in front of me. That's epic. That's great. That's great.
Their innocence manifests as a fallen star, and they have to take care of the star.
Wow. This is super cool. Yeah, so you should absolutely check this out. I'm a huge fan of everything Dot does, which is why she's showing up on more and more stuff on my channel. But you should definitely check that out. That's awesome. And I'm glad that Dot is with us again for Masters of the Dungeon, along with our guest star. And I am very happy that we were actually able to bring this person on, because I was talking with him off air about this, that I've been watching some of his stuff from a distance with a lot of the other people that connect with. And he was always like either GMing in or playing on stuff with Cthulhu, or, the new stuff that was the Dragonlance Ravenloft mashup, which is awesome. And I was just like, this is a person that I should definitely bring on. So I'm very happy to welcome Don to the stream. Don, hello, finally to meet you virtually, so to speak, face to face. And thanks for being on the show and all that. And for those who do not know you, do you want to just briefly describe like what you were all about on the Twitches and the stuff that you do here?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess I have to finally define it.
There you go. Now it is.
No, it's the thing. This is it. No, thank you, Greg, for having me on the channel today. I've also seen a number of your guys' shows over time. We haven't had a lot of chance to interact, but I'm very excited to be here today and have a conversation with y'all. I'm Don. I am the Dungeon Master right now for May Black Roses Bloom, which is my Dark Dragonlance adaptation for 5th edition. And it's inspired by Ravenloft. It's not set in Ravenloft, but sort of in the same vein a little bit as the mechanic, which sounded awesome, Chelsea, of innocence being lost. There's a corruption mechanic, and this is something that was a part of earlier editions of Ravenloft. And I really, because there's something performative about streaming sometimes, I thought that would be a really interesting thing to bring into the characters' lives. And so that's a big part of it. Beyond that, I'm doing a bunch of shows and a couple of podcasts, but I also write Dungeons and Dragons material. I'm starting to branch out this year and write modules and adventures for other settings and other systems.
Nice.
But I done a couple, The Blood Plague, which is a dark fantasy source book and adventure. And then
it's coming in the mail. I can't wait.
It's coming right now. I have my book over here.
Do
I think
you know? I'm so jealous. Mine's on the way.
The only one. Yeah, they're coming. And then I just did Lampslight Sanitarium, which is a horror source book with a pair of adventures for 5th edition as well. That's what I've been up to.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't know what you mean, Shadow, about my taste in hats. Like why Don and I would have any connection to that in regard to that at all.
The
Like,
hat memo.
I don't, like that's just complete coincidence.
I missed that memo.
People right now, like, if to be a guest, just start wearing hats like these.
Just start wearing hats.
That's all you have to do. Well, this is awesome, and I'm very excited to have you on. And I want to start actually with you, Don, because one of the things that you sort of set up gave me a chance to ask this question, which is about our campaigns. So typically at the beginning, we talk a little bit about how our campaigns are going and highlight something cool, or I guess not cool, which happened in one of them. So I wonder if there's one of the campaigns that you're involved in, and it could be the Black Roses one, or it could be something else that has happened of late that stood out to you in particular. And it could be either from a DM's point of view, from a player's point of view, something that was just like, that was awesome when that occurred.
Yeah, I get so excited getting to work with so many very, very creative people who are constantly throwing me curveballs, whether I'm playing or GMing. But a big part of Dragonlance, without getting into what exactly Dragonlance is beyond like a classic D&D setting that's kind of not been revisited recently.
Yep.
A big part of Dragonlance is time travel. In the novels, and specifically people using and weaponizing time travel to gain power. And so that's an element that May Black Roses Bloom touches on. And we have a couple of characters, Honoria, who's played by Tia Zimmer, and Kelvin, who's played by Pope. That's what he goes by in the community, Pope. World build. So they're both playing time travelers, and it finally came to a head that time travel happened, and they managed in our last episode to reset the timeline in a very major way, in ways that I was not anticipating. I actually took this week off just so I could have a little extra time to figure out like what this means for our campaign going forward. I had to really sit down with it. But
you made him tap into his savings because he was like, how do I handle time travel quick? That's funny.
So yeah, players like to press like a nuclear bomb button on your campaign every once in a while. Yep. We just had one of those in our last sessions, and it was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, that's really cool. But I was just, I made the mistake of titling one of my episodes that just happened of the one I'll be doing after this, Curse of Strahd, called The Road West, because they've been spending all this time in this town of Valaki, and I'm like, I imagine they're done with it. And at the end of it, they're literally sitting there staking out like this CSI thing so they can, figure out how to stop this huge wolf that's been killing these people. I'm like, clearly I need to stop titling my episodes ahead of time. Like, just be like, today's episode is the players do stuff.
Big
and
fantasy
I react.
title.
I'm just like, yeah, exactly. Put epic fantasy title here. And just like, but no, that's awesome. And yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but that's true. I hadn't thought about how much time travel kind of plays into that. And you've been able to do, I believe, a fair bit of these kind of, haven't you done some of these flashback episodes with them too, Don? I seem to remember with even individual characters, or am I misremembering that? I thought you did.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I've done one for each of the central cast, each of the main characters.
I thought I remembered that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we were conceptualizing everything, wanted to make sure they left enough unexplored in their past that we could define it later. And they've all, very thankfully, because the players are so creative, it's all had a big impact on the main storyline. So those flashback episodes weren't just sort of throwaways, but the most recent flashback also involved present tense, one of the time travelers going back to another character's past. And that's why that's how things got a little crazy. But it was probably one of my very favorite episodes that we've done so far.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That botches with a lot of things. It's like timeline manipulation.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah. What the hell is the trilogy about the Majere twins, not Chronicles, because the Dragons of Legends? Oh gosh, I mean, maybe you remember, Don. I had all of the Dragonlance books, and I don't remember what the second of the trilogies was. That was like stories of the brothers. It was just about Raistlin and Caraman. I don't remember. I don't remember. Anyway, yeah. Was it Legends? It is Legends? Yeah, I thought I think it is Legends. Yeah, okay, it is Legends, yeah. Anyway, no, that's neat. I think that's really interesting to kind of play with that sort of mechanic. Well, same question to you, Dot. What has been going on in your campaigns, or anything in particular? Like, you want to talk about when you took away some more innocence from your people? Like, is that?
Yeah, we can do that. We can talk about that. So I actually just closed out a Fate Core campaign. I've been doing a lot of writing too, mostly for Fate, because like that's just my system. It's where my home base is. Because Fate lets me put anything I want on it, so I can go real weird. So we just closed out something called Fate of the Appliance Wars. Which was basically my Brave Little Toaster campaign. Everybody played broken appliances in like a post-apocalyptic world where they're hunted by humans, and and so it was quite. First off, I had a stellar cast. Myth was in that. Lindy was in it. Kika was in it, and I had a slew of amazing people. I can't believe I got them all in one place together. But they made some. It's really interesting to play a game where you're not playing humanoid, and your wants and your needs are different. Like I added so they have like physical stress and like mental stress, because they have both of those, but they also had like electricity that they had to deal with. How were they powered as an appliance in a post-apocalyptic world? Did you siphon it? Did you have batteries? So needs become super duper different in terms of just the world and the way you play things. And so I don't know that there was one single thing, but having that group of creative people around a table, building a world that is not human in any way, shape, or form, it blew my mind. It straight up blew my mind. So it was only a 4-episode like campaign that we ran, but you can catch the whole thing on my YouTube channel. Just amazing. All of them are just amazing. Anyway, so that's that one. But in terms of losing innocence,
since I brought that up, I mean, yeah, let's
stop talking about it. There was actually there were 2 really interesting moments. They're first level characters, so of course as a DM you have to like your pool of monsters to choose from in D&D is minimal. So goblins of course are like a go-to. So through a series of strange events, and of course I expected them to fight the goblins, and praise be, the children didn't. They chose to friend the goblins around a campfire with sweet rolls. So but in doing so, the goblins were on a mission to steal a child, a baby, for a hag. And in stopping the goblins from doing that, they told them, they're like, look, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. We have to do this. And of course, back and forth, back and forth. So they all spent the night around the fire. They woke up the next day and somebody had come and slit the throats of the 2 goblins while they were sleeping. And having the kids wake up and have to cope with what is literally their first death, like having to see a dead body and something that they had tried to save. They thought they had like saved the day. And these fairies came to them and explained that the forest and the world has balance, and you messed with the balance. That baby was supposed to die and it didn't. Wow. You saved the baby, but in essence, you lost something else with that. And so the character, like these players who usually would not give a rat's behind about 2 goblins whose throats were slit, have something traumatic happen, and it changed the way that they viewed the entirety. And it was the first bit of innocence lost.
Wow.
So it's like you did the right thing, but in doing so, you've affected something. Your choices have consequences, which is, I think, the hardest thing as a child to really learn.
Yeah.
There's a hard thing to learn. So anyways, that was kind of a crazy thing. And then they got in combat this last week, and I thought this was interesting. We have a Luxodon barbarian, a little baby Luxodon. It's so cute. Played by nomadic nonetheless. So it's just amazing. So anyways, he his character got really upset in a rage because these tooth fairies would try to remove his tusk in combat, and he raged out, and one of the other children had never seen somebody rage like that, and it actually scared the other character.
Oh man.
We found her at the end of the combat hiding because somebody she trusted and loved turned into a rage barbarian, and she had to cope with like what it means to like, do I trust this person? They just slaughtered hundreds of pixies. Like, so again, it's just this like interesting balance. I'm watching my players contend with that. And the loss of innocence at such a young age has been interesting. And it's kind of meta too, because you're an adult and having to go back and live in that place of nostalgia is also really cool because we're not playing with kids. I'm playing with grown ass people.
Right.
So there's this just like level of nostalgia that just like spreads over the whole thing, and it does really pull at the heartstrings. So I don't know, as a GM, my evil side's like, I love watching you struggle. yes. So.
Yeah, that's good. And you have experienced enough players that they will not, who are not themselves innocent, that they won't just be like blaming you, like this is your fault. It's like, I'm just the messenger. No, you are the one who
exactly
who made this happen. No, that's awesome. Well, the one I'll do, I'll do quickly. But it was interesting because it was tying into what you were talking about, this sort of the connections among and between characters with my Adventures of Middle-earth campaign, which has been this very I mean, first of all, Tolkien is my jam and arguably made me into who I am as a person in part. It's not really being hyperbolic. And so having a chance to actually do a campaign with it and have it be sponsored no less by them and all that is like wild. And it's got people like Trendane in it, and it's amazing. It's been so awesome to see that entire cast come to, and Will and Tarion, the author of Mal El-Matar, has been a great combination cast. Anyway, but they've really gotten into it with each other where there are these little sort of quiet moments that I really like. I like this in fiction as well, moments and in film, where there are moments of sort of quiet connection that to me really resonate more powerfully even than, epic battle number 50,000 or whatever. And there was one such moment where they were talking to, they had just finished up dealing with this very difficult thing where they went to the Dwemer There's this the evil artifact that they've discovered information about. They need to report it to Radagast the Brown. They had been betrayed by this other bastard, and they managed to finally get that bastard killed off just in time before he does these other things. And they're closing in on the end of this set of adventures that are called Wilderland Adventures. And they're going to be heading off to Erebor, which is east of Mirkwood, the Lonely Mountain where Smaug lives for Hobbit fans. And they're going to be, or did live, this is set after his death. And so they're about to go through Mirkwood and do all that stuff. And they were basically talking about being pulled in multiple directions because Will's character, Robar, his sister is in trouble to the north. He has to go and help her. Amal's character, the River, who is a woodsman, her father is being held at this necromantic tower to the south. So we've got that. The dwarven character, played by this professional cartoonist Terry Toons, who's great, she has been away from her home, has been asked to return by Dane of the Iron Hills himself, and so she's got, so they're being pulled all this way in multiple directions. And then you've got Tren's character, and he plays Tawny Bear, who is a Bjorning, which makes a lot of sense if you know Tren actually, was a Bjorning who is a former warrior who fought in the Battle of the Five Armies and has become a pacifist because of his profound trauma that he kind of experienced as a consequence of all this. And so he's quiet and he doesn't say much. And Tren is a brilliant role player, is really good at being able to invest him with this kind of dignity and everything. And so they got through all of this stuff and they're all sort of debating about where to go and what to do. And then they finally come to Tawny and they're like, but Tawny, like, we don't want to just like make you come with us. Like, what is your plan to do this? And he just has this moment where he just stops and he's kind of like, with that incredible voice too, right? He's like, well, I've been in a very deep place myself, and I don't have any family to speak of. The only family I possess here is with all of you. So wherever you go, I will go, there and everywhere else. And so everyone just kind of is like, now, nothing of what I've said is super dramatic. Nothing about that was like, wow, I've never heard a line reading like that. It was just a quiet moment of connection between characters that had people like wiping away tears because they really felt the sense. He had never told them in character that he didn't have any family anymore.
I call those stair stepper moments because they're the moment that the whole cast together goes whatnot.
Yes. Yes.
That it connects this whole story in a way that you could not have seen coming.
Yep, absolutely. And that's happened multiple times within this campaign. So it was great. And I love little quiet moments like that. And of course, afterwards, and the players really love each other. There's great chemistry there. But it starts actually with, as you say, those stair-stepper moments is a good way to put it. So that was really cool. I really love to see moments of story and kind of quiet connection with each other. So that was pretty neat. God knows we need a lot more quiet connection moments in real life. So it's good to be able to see it in this one as well. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about the subject of the day and kind of throw this out for the panel generally. And I want to ask about this thing that I thought of, which is this sort of the shadow of D&D. And I want to explain this very carefully because I do love D&D. It is my favorite game. I think it is the best game ever made. For multiple reasons. I'm a fan. I'm about to play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Okay, so I am a fan of this. All right. Yes. That said, I have, through having discussions with many people like the two of you and others, seen about how many wonderful other systems there are that I did not realize when I was growing up playing Dungeons and Dragons starting in 1984 with the Red Box and then moving on from there. And those independent ones like Scum and Villainy, which I heard, which Dot was mentioning off cast, and Blades in the Dark, and Wilderness of Mirrors, which I do a modified version of myself, and Esper Genesis, and all of these different games that are out there that really have pushed the envelope significantly and have moved kind of the ball down the field, I think. So the question I want to throw out there for you folks to think about is, how much do we want to push and emphasize connections to something like D&D for this reason? We know now that on Twitch, for example, you can characterize your session as being part of Dungeons & Dragons or being part of tabletop role-playing. And there has been a discussion in the community about, well, obviously we want to do tabletop because that's more actually what it is. Except that the big elephant in the room, right, the big overwhelming shadow, the big presence is Dungeons and Dragons. So if you say D&D, you're likely to sort of tap into this network of people that through Critical Role and Acquisitions Incorporated and many others know about D&D and they don't know about anything else. So I'm curious about how much you emphasize connections to D&D or not in your games, how much you sort of lean towards using D&D. Should we break away from it entirely? Is D&D adjusting to the indie push and like co-opting some of those systems and maybe being more role-playing heavy than it was in its origins or not? I'm just curious about where we measure the impact of the big kahuna in the room and how much we sort of work with or against that. So I will throw that out to whichever one of you wants to start with that first.
Dungeon Master.
Thank you. Thank you, my love.
Do you have feels, Don? You got feels?
Yeah. I mean, it is a complicated thing. I love D&D too. It's 5th edition, especially. I think is
agreed.
And I've enjoyed all the previous editions, but I really think that 5th edition was a significant step forward in terms of creating something more modern and more open to narrative play.
Totally agree.
But, it is still, at the end of the day, D&D is a game it's a combat-focused, medieval style swords and sorcery game. And that's what it's designed to be. And it does that one thing really well. And you can hack D&D like you can hack anything.
Right.
But there are other great games out there. And you mentioned Fate Core. Fate's great for turning into whatever you need. I think Powered by the Apocalypse, the same.
Yep, another great one.
Yep.
Cypher's the same. Yeah.
Cypher, yeah. But maybe people don't. Maybe it's harder for people to wrap their heads around that. As terms of viewers, if they only know D&D, are they going to take a chance watching something else? And that's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I think too we have to remember, you made the point. I mean, it's a fantasy game, right? And I think specifically within the last 10 years, fantasy has become cool again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That it was fantasy was not always cool, which is why D&D has not always been cool. But over time, thanks to the media and thanks to a lot of new creative content coming out, even on like a large Hollywood scale, thanks to, let's just look at the Lord of the Rings movies, right? Or Game of Thrones. How many of the people that view those have never read the books, but it doesn't matter. There's something about fantasy that I think that people connect with because it's not what we know. So when I do something like write a Fate of the Anchorman campaign that's set in the world of Anchorman, in the 70s. That's not what everybody's looking for, right? Like I come.
I don't know what you mean. That's an enormous growth. Organization.
It was blessed. That's a whole separate conversation. But I say that because I think that there's something about D&D that is, we can connect to it. It's easy. It's a first step in the right direction. Remind me. I'll talk about the Anchorman campaign later. Before I get off on a tangent. And so for me, I think D&D is that first step. I think this conversation gets had a lot in the film industry, right? Where we have these people that are at the tip top. We have these like multi-million-dollar funded movies like The Avengers. But then you have an entire 97% of the industry that is indie-based movie making.
Yeah.
You cannot ask somebody to come into the indie market first. A love of film is made from, unfortunately, Hollywood, the bigger things, right? And from that love, we start to go, oh, who did that? I wonder what else that they've done. Or I wonder what. And so I think that we have to look at D&D as a gateway. It is the gateway drug. It was my gateway drug. It's where I started. It's where I started at 3.5 and then was so into 3.5, I went backwards and then came back forwards, right? To 5. So I think we have to recognize D&D for what it is, which is a totally digestible, understandable and fantastical system. And now with 5, so literally easy to understand and pick up so quickly, it's a great place to start. But I think that the tabletop community also has to have a responsibility to recognize the indie market, just like all filmmakers have a responsibility, even if they're part of Hollywood, to recognize the indie market for what it is. So how do we stop comparing other games to D&D? When you're at a table and you accidentally slip and you say, make an initiative roll, but the game calls it something else. Don't go, oh, I meant to, that's D&D. Right? There's this piece of like, we have to stop comparing other things to it, even subconsciously. And it's an awareness thing. And I myself have had to deal with it over time. And so I don't know. I think that there's this piece that's really beautiful about it. We have to, like, Critical Role. People are like, how do I get to be Critical Role? Well, you're not. You're never going to be Critical Role because they are this thing. They are the bee's knees. They are the peak of it. But what they've done is brought so many people to this world. So it's more about how do we educate those people and how do we help them understand that tabletop RPG does not equal Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
It doesn't. Dungeons and Dragons is under the tabletop world.
Right. And that's actually in the point that you made about our requirement to support these things as streamers, I think is significant. One of the reasons for that, too, is that there is... I think that the reason I mentioned the part about D&D being connected to these other indie things is that I think D&D got pushed. I think that 5th edition was very clearly pushed by the not so positive reaction to 4th edition, which drove a lot of people to Pathfinder. There were a lot of people who sort of decided that they weren't going to go that direction. And to their credit, they spent a long time, years, beta testing and getting stuff ready for, D&D Next, as they called it. And I agree with Don that 5e was a triumph as far as edition design. Like, they really went back to the stuff that mattered. But having said all of that, it still remains, as you've said, D&D. So being able to look at examples of how these places have sort of pushed that framework of what D&D does is great. But the thing that I want to go back to, actually, Don, that you said is about the difference between hacking a system, like hacking D&D to be what you want. And I guess you could even argue, I don't know if you would feel this way, that sort of what you've done, Don, with May Black Roses Bloom is a little bit of a hack, I guess. Like, I mean, it's a
complete hack.
It's a hack.
I homebrew a lot of rules. It's D&D like when you first look at it, but it's very sidestepped.
Okay.
Yeah, but I guess my question is there a game out there that does that already covers this system? You know what I mean? Like, I have people come to me all the time that's like, oh, I'm gonna put Cthulhu in D&D. I'm like, well, guess what?
That already exists.
That already exists.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so instead of that I think is where the hacking line.
Yeah.
Like, there's not an Anchorman game out there. That's what I wanted to play. I knew that's what I wanted to play. So I had to make that happen. And I think in your case, it's the same thing here. But if it's already out there, I think that becomes then a monopolization. It's basically saying, well, the only way to play a tabletop RPG is to play it on this.
Right.
Instead of saying, well, why don't I give something else a try?
Right. And I guess one of the questions that this leads to is, how much do we simply try to adjust pre-existing systems that players are familiar with and viewers and watchers now with us on Twitch are familiar with, and how much do we really go out of our comfort zone to try something that is brand new on its own? So as an example, 2 of the campaigns that I run are both 5e compatible driven systems. Esper Genesis is, and so is Adventures of Middle-earth. But both of those systems have substantial departures. The corruption mechanic, the shadow mechanic, even the journey mechanic, the audience mechanic. These are all things unique to AME, and they would not work in the D&D broad-based, sort of standard 5e sort of setup. Same thing happens with Esper Genesis. On the other hand, as you just pointed out, there are games that maybe it would make sense to sort of go way outside of them. For example, Paul Ziege is the Clay That Woke, which is about these minotaurs in a jungle city where the jungle is constantly encroaching upon the city, and the minotaurs, who are always male, have to come to terms with moments of rage where they go running into the jungle and must recapture the... I mean, it's just like the whole thing as you're reading it, you're just like, awesome, great, awesome, more awesome, super awesome.
Right.
And there's not a chance on God's green earth that would fit without having to really like stretch and pull to kind of get a D&D sort of version of it. So how much are we like from both of your points of view, where would the line be where you'd be like, you know what, I just can't hack this anymore. I've got to do something completely new, either using like a modified Fate core or developing something completely of my own. Like, how much homebrew are you willing to do before you're like, this system just can't contain what I want, the kind of game that I want to play? And let me start with you, Don, on that, and then
I think I'm willing to homebrew quite a lot for D&D, but only if D&D is the right system for the story that I want to tell.
Damn, I couldn't have said that better. Yes.
So with May Black Roses Bloom, with the Dragonlance show, it's Dragonlance, and Dragonlance has been done in other games besides D&D, but I wanted to kind of appeal to people who miss Dragonlance. They miss what it was, and to show that, hey, just because it doesn't exist in 5th edition doesn't mean it can't. Here you go.
Right.
Honestly, my hope is that Wizards will publish Dragonlance material. I want them to
First do Eberron Wizards, then do Dragonlance.
Yeah, then do
I'm just kidding. No, you should do both. Yeah.
But I that's why I picked D&D 5th edition for Dragonlance. But if I were doing a different game, we talked about, I talk about all different kinds of ideas all the time. I'm constantly having ideas with my friends that I work with and create games with. And most of the time we are talking about using systems like Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate or Cypher, because they're better for those stories because they have less baggage. They're easier and they're less work too. A lot of work goes into creating a game. And D&D, trying to mold it into being everything, it requires an awful lot of work to do that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about just very quickly to follow up on that though, Don. So what is the moment where you're like, this is too much work to get it to work? Like, is there something in your mind where you're like, no, like what's the tipping point for you where you're like, this is not going to get it done this way?
If there is a setting book, for instance, if I want to run a book in a game in Faerun, then I'm going to use D&D. If I want to run Ravenloft, then I'm going to use D&D. If I want to run something that already exists, then I'll do it in D&D. If I'm doing something that's not fantasy, medieval fantasy, then I'm probably looking at a different system.
Okay.
As far as a DM, as a game master, that's what I'm doing it. But I do think, like, on the other side, as a writer, Lamplight Sanitarium. This is like Victorian style. Asylum based, that sort of gothic horror. Why should that have been D&D 5th edition? Because people want it.
Yeah.
Because people want that.
Yeah.
And so there's a market there, and there, like that's a question. I don't know if there's a set answer for me.
Yeah.
But I feel both ways simultaneously, that there should be a trickle down effect. And I think Critical Role, like what Chelsea was saying, I think that the explosion of popularity of indie TTRPGs is because of the trickle down effect.
Yep.
Yeah. No, there's no question about them.
I just played a game of Bluebeard's Bride.
Oh my God, I love that game so much.
I've never seen that played. I really want to I've never seen it played.
I think it's, like, in terms of narrative, it's probably, I think, the best designed game I've ever seen.
It's amazing.
And I don't think anybody would have known about it without without the trickle down effect that Chelsea was talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have a sense, like same question you, Dot, do you have a moment where you're like, this is going to take too much? Like for you, you have, as you said, kind of fate. I'll rephrase it. It doesn't have to be D&D. Is there a moment where you're like, I really want this to fit fate, but it won't fit fate? I mean, are there systems like that that ever happen?
Yeah, I think for me, when I go to look at the bottom line is like when I go to look at a system that I want to run, and I'm going to end up homebrewing it anyway. The question is, what do I want out of the game?
Okay.
Right? D&D, as Jonathan pointed out, is a combat-based system. Literally, the experience points are not based on roleplay. They're not based on story points. They are based on how many things you kill. So I will argue that till the day I'm done, but that at the core of the way the rulebook is set, it is based on how many things you kill. Okay, so if I want a very fantasy style or general medieval setting, and I am in it to let them be these monster slaying heroes, why wouldn't I go with D&D? It's just the easiest one, and then they got tons of freaking books. I can pull old stuff, like just a library full of things.
Yep.
So when I go in, if I'm not looking for a monster slaying medieval set game, I have to find something else. And when I go to start looking for things, then the question is, do I want it to be about character building? Do I want it to be about story and narrative? Something like Wilderness of Mirrors, which we don't really play in ours, but is about the conniving side of the way we twist and can work against the sabotage, the espionage aspect, right? So again, it's like, even if I wanted to run an espionage game in any set time period, that might be a great way to do it. So I, as a GM, have to ask myself, what am I looking for? Because Cypher, to me, has a very magical, mystical aspect to it, where Fate does not have that. That is the difference to me between those two systems. Fate is like, it is just bread. It's just a piece of bread. That's just like a base system that you can just like put any topping you want on it. The Cypher bread is a little snazzier and has some seeds and shit on the outside that's already inlaid in it. And you got this idea of ciphers and they come in and out, right? So yeah, I think when I go to look for a system and I'm gonna have to homebrew something, what story am I trying to lead my players through as a GM? And what kind of world am I building is how I go and find the right thing.
Yeah, I just shadowed seedy bread.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I'm either enjoying this analogy or being gradually disturbed by it.
Sure how I feel about it. I have weird analogies. That's my life story. So yeah, I guess that's how I do it, and I think that's really why I found a home in Fate, because Fate is not about combat. The entire Fate core system is based on building character, based on your choices and the fate of dice rolling, and I love that.
Well, and I was just thinking about this in regards to systems that get hacked. For example, Blades in the Dark being hacked into Scum and Villainy, which is basically a hack of that initial thing. One of the things that strikes me, though, and I'm curious what you folks think about this. So I, like most, red-blooded, God-fearing tabletop players in the world, like Star Wars. And I've always wanted to be able to get more into a Star Wars game, but I have to admit that I find the one which is currently run by Fantasy Flight, it was originally West End Games, I believe, I find a lot of that to be inscrutable. I've watched it being played. This is just me personally, I just don't find it particularly engaging. I don't think the dice mechanic works the way it should. I don't know. It just, to me, that does not sort of flex together. And I find myself sometimes being like, man, I wish they could just do some D&D-ish version of this. And then I'm like, that's not a good thought. Maybe you should use another system. Don't be so, And yet I find myself, maybe because I'm just so familiar with that initial system, I find myself looking for something sometimes that provides a sense of simplicity that would make it easier to get into the world. Because what I'm really looking for is the world, right? I want to feel like I'm in Star Wars at those moments. And that's why I think Adventures of Middle-earth works, because I want to feel like I'm in Middle-earth. And I really feel like we are when we're doing this because of things they've added onto it. So I guess I'm curious about that too. Are there moments where you find that systems do not really work? No, there is no system really that works exactly for the way that you want to put something together. And what then do you do with that? I mean, I don't know, is the bread, is Fate so bread that you could just literally do anything with it? Or are there things that Fate won't carry that you've got to...
Fate is not a combat system, so you're going to look at very minimal combat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like that's one thing it doesn't carry. Like if I'm going to expect that there needs to be a big battle or a gunfight or something like that,
Just doesn't.
might not use Fate.
Okay.
Cypher actually doesn't have a terribly great combat system either.
So then what?
Yeah.
So if you want
So then
something
once
that's
you're like, okay, so now I'm going to go look at some other things. I might take a peek at I mean, I guess I could go look at D&D, but again, so much of D&D is specific to D&D. And I think that's the thing, is like, it's really hard to pull things out of D&D into something else. You either just have to overlay it,
okay.
like overlay your ideas on D&D, or you can't really use it. But I mean, there's tons of other systems. Genesis is one that I've kind of peeked at, though I'm not a huge fan. The Genesis system is always like an option. Dungeon World.
Yeah, Dungeon World. I have actually a good friend who's big on Dungeon World. Yeah.
I have a lot of people that are. And then I think too, you know, if you're really in a place where you're looking for something specific and you're just not getting it anywhere else, it's time for you to ask yourself as a GM, when do you need to start writing your own games?
Mm-hmm.
Like, when do you start writing your own systems? And I think that that's something that a lot of people are terrified of. But just like the arts world, it's okay to recycle things. What makes D&D loved by everybody is they nailed a system. They nailed a system that is super duper easy to understand. And it's okay to say, well, I really love the way skills are done, but I'm not so fond of the way magic is handled.
Right. Right. And
Right?
so you're talking about basically the more modular of a system that you can develop, where you can bolt on and take off parts that you need and don't need, the better that actually works. Yeah, that's interesting, West River. The first edition, you take one of the base classes and turn them into barbarians, necromancers, druids, and rangers just by how you leveled them and played them. Yeah. Sure. And I mean, I think one of the things about all of these is that any experienced game master can probably work anything out of anything. But at a certain point, this is the argument you get into with video games as well. If I have to ignore a bunch of things about the game to make the game play the way I want it to, then the game is not working properly, right? If I have a bunch of things available and it's like, well, then all you just don't go through those doors. Yeah, but the presence of the door is indicative of something which is fundamentally part of the game design. And so maybe I can ignore one of those doors or two of them. But if I find myself metaphorically walking through a hallway and I'm supposed to ignore 70% of the exits to that hallway, the hell am I doing walking down that hallway? Like, can I choose another hallway with doors that I would like to go through at some point, you know? Right. So that sometimes becomes an issue where it's just too unwieldy to kind of work around everything.
Yeah, and you don't want to make your life miserable as a GM either.
Right,
I think that
right.
For me, that's a line. It's like at the point where I'm struggling to get it together. How are my players supposed to get it together? God bless, right?
Right.
So like at some point you have to ask yourself, like, what is actually easiest on you as a GM? It's why I use Fate, because like the system. I read that book one time through and was like, I get this.
Yeah.
Like, this is my home base, and I think as GMs we just start to find that thing. You know? Do either of you think that players, when it comes down to it, really care? Like, do you think they care about the system, or do they care about the GM and the other players? I don't know. I'm curious. What do you think, Don?
I think it depends on what the player wants out of the game. I'll be honest. The reason why D&D 5th edition is still my favorite game, even though I love these other games as far as to play, is because I like the strategy of combat. And as good as some of these other games are, Fate. Cypher's not my favorite, but I do like Fate. I like even the basic RPG system that is kind of the core of what Call of Cthulhu.
Right.
That's great. And then my go-to bread is probably Powered by the Apocalypse, which Dungeon World is based on. And a bunch of games are based on. But all of them lack any sort of meaningful strategic element of combat. And the games that do have it, besides D&D, the modern games like Warhammer Fantasy and some of these games, I personally find them to be too crunchy. I might enjoy them for a night. But how could I sit down, and especially on stream, you were talking too about we're playing games that people watch, and that changes everything.
Yep.
I can't ask people to sit there and watch us kind of work through very complex mechanics. And I feel like D&D is just about as far as that as people can go.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think one of the things that D&D also allows for is to allow some of that combat to be mechanically satisfying, but also narratively described. Yes. So you can really emphasize moments that are epic in scale, and it feels like you were describing an incredibly powerful, battle that works together. Whereas others of them, almost because they want to get away from this shadow, which is why I talked about the shadow of D&D, go out of their way to be like, well, no, check out the extra crunch, and then it ends up being like an Avalon Hill board game. And I got to be honest with you, if anyone is familiar with, I'm probably dating myself here, but the Avalon Hill board games of the 80s, these were very, very historically realistic and very complex, and oftentimes boring as all get out. Like, they're just, manuals out to here. And it's like, at a certain point, when you've got to put that many rules together, why are you like, what is this? Like, and I mean, again,
Right.
there were some people who love doing that, and that's great. There's some people who love advanced physics equations. I am not one of those people. I'm a humanities person. It's not my deal. So for those people, it's great. But in terms of like streaming it, I find it is not that interesting. And so there's always trying to thread the needle of making something that is narratively powerful, but still kind of matches that mechanical benefit of the combat. So it's not just hand waved, like I
Right.
jump here and do this, and then I jump. I mean, that's really Wilderness of Mirrors that Dot plays with me. That really is kind of a narrative combat. When the combat happens, it's very narratively oriented. And that's good because you're moving it forward, but that's also because most of Mission Impossible and Leverage and everything is not about combat. Like, when there are fights, they are quick and they tend to be brutal and they're over quickly. And so there's not this extensive back and forth deal.
I mean, even
So-
the new, regardless of how you feel about it, the new VTM system, it's like, if you can't complete combat in 3 rounds, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
I
the
have not
book
had a
is
chance to know that, but I've heard that. Yeah.
out. You need to be done it. And so it's actually the GM that I'm playing with, he does something great, which is everybody calls out what action they want before they roll dice. And then we all roll dice at the same time. It's brilliant. And it speeds combat up exponentially versus doing initiative round order, because it's not about strategic based combat, which I think is, which is why we need an initiative order, right? But it's been really, really cool playing through some of the World of Darkness stuff too.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, Tales from the Loop, Optic. Yeah, like there are some of these different systems that are doing that. I mean, I do some writing for a game called Emberwind, which is based on the Rise system, which is very clever and very beautifully put together and structured in an interesting way. But I will be the first to admit that it's kind of crunchy.
It is
and
super
there's,
crunchy.
there's
As somebody
as you know, Dot. Yeah, like, I mean, there's penetration mechanics and how much resistances and all this stuff, which is difficult. Although now I'm curious about this. There are systems, though, that feel like they're easier on the players than they are on the GMs. So, and the thing I'm thinking about here is Blades in the Dark. That's an example, it seems to me, of a system that, to me, requires an enormous amount of work on the part of the GM/DM to make it fit and seem seamless to the players. Now, as a player, when I'm playing through Blades of the Dark or Scum and Villainy, I'm like, oh, this is so slick. Yeah, Scum and Villainy, and my name is Han Solo. What's up? Like, I'm in this zone. But my God, like, from the other side of it, if I'm admiring the craft of the GMing, the amount of like stuff that they've had to plot out in terms of conceptual frameworks of how many mission points for this, that, or that. I mean, like, it just seems like an enormous amount to me. So I'm curious about that, because Don, one of the things you said was, I'm sorry, not you, it was Dot, who said that it's also about how easy it makes it for the GM. But there are systems, right, that are a lot harder on us and a lot easier on the players. Is there a line there that we're like, you know what, even though it's a pain in the ass, players will love this and it will look good, so I'll put in the extra work, if you know what I mean? Is there a line for that either of you sort of fall on one side of? As long as it's good for the players, you'll put in the work? Or is there a point where you're like, I just can't put in this extra work to make it fit for the players?
I mean, I think that I'm a very prep heavy GM, and I love that aspect of it. I like writing.
Okay.
I want to do, like, prep doesn't scare me away, but the actual process of prep for a game, whether or not that process is fun for me. For instance, I'll play Blades in the Dark, but I won't run Blades in the Dark, and it's because when I think through that process as a GM,
right,
it doesn't seem like fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas D&D, I enjoy creating unique NPCs or items or whatever the crunch is for that. Actually enjoy that process, so I'm happy to do it. But a lot of games, I think even the games that don't require a lot of prep, they're still challenging. For instance, I love Monster of the Week. I'm doing a Monster of the Week game right now.
Nice.
Basically all improv. which is the exact opposite of what I normally do. And if you're a GM who doesn't feel comfortable with winging it and trying to tell something a coherent story, then that can be really intimidating. And some folks, especially I think the folks we play with are pretty good at improving and enjoy that. But I can see like at a game at a convention or whatnot, I can see something like Monster of the Week being a really challenging game to play with people you don't know.
Yep. That's true. Yep. And by the way, just one quick note about that. That is one of the sort of legacies of something like Critical Role, which is that, people imagine that the only way one plays a role-playing game is with this intensely improvisational thing done with all of this acting. And the reality is that many of the people we play with are not actors. They are not people with formal dramatic training. And we do ourselves a disservice by trying to get a bunch of top voice actor people to be our only players. Like, first of all, even if you could get that...
by just comparing ourselves to
right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, in general, I have that conversation all the time. I'm like, you understand that these people, they're professional actors. Before they were rolling dice around a table for everybody else to see, this is what they did. People paid them to do this. And when you bring a level of talent at that height together all in one place, of course it's going to explode.
Exactly. And the other thing I want to say about that, which I think is really important, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but the other danger there is that I also think that it reduces the field of interesting play if we are looking only for the people who do the acting method of doing this, right? So if I think about players, a good example was this Infinity and Beyond group, which is, again, playing Curse of Strahd. One of the original players I had on that had done a lot of, video game role-playing, had never done tabletop role-playing, and was frankly intimidated by it. And here he comes on with Trendane and Rob, who are both professional voice actors, and all these people. And by the end of this campaign, he had not only had he risen to the occasion, but he had held his own easily with them. And part of the reason is that I think he was picking up on stuff. He loved tactical combat and he loved that strategic aspect, but he also really tapped into what mattered about that character, which is all that you really needed to do. And he was a team player, and that worked also. Now, he was an animator. He ended up getting a job at Telltale, and has been on my mind quite a bit lately with what everything was going on with Telltale. But he got a job with Telltale Games. His perspective was enormously important, so that everything doesn't become, open mic in Boston for Emerson College kids. Like, there's got to be other stuff out there besides just Critical Role style of play. So not only is it not a good thing to compare because it's going to intimidate people, I don't even think it's good for the play. I think the players you need variety, right, in terms of how people approach situations. So I guess one of the things the questions that leads to before we wrap up this topic is, do either of you sort of have moments where you actively seek, how do I put this question, where you're actively trying to promote a certain kind of game, or, because you've talked a lot, both of you have mentioned, well, it depends on what game you want. Okay, so let's hit the nail on the head. Generally, what kind of game do you want? Do you want a game that is more emphasizing improv, or a game that is more emphasizing combat? I know you can shade it in different directions, but surely there is something that you're really like, my default type of game that I love the most is X. Is there something like that? And do you have to sort of force yourself then to move out of your comfort zone to not do X, but to do Y, Z, or any of these other things?
I mean, what brought me to all these new tabletops was getting out of my comfort zone. I had been doing tabletop streaming for about a year, and I realized that I was only playing Dungeons and Dragons. And it was actually a really good friend and somebody that I admire heavily in the tabletop community that was like, well, why don't you try something else? Like, I was doing the D&D podcast. I was playing a lot of tabletop, or a lot of D&D over on Roll4It's channel. Not Roll4, Encounter Roleplay. And so I had hit a point where I was like, you know what? You're right. I should challenge myself to learn something new. So I took a break, actually, from D&D. I was like, I'm taking 3 months off, and I'm not rolling a dice for D&D. I'm going to force myself to learn a new system, to try this. So I started reaching out to other people, like Scraticus, who was running Cypher, and Marcy, who runs a lot of Cypher, and Grant. And so they started letting me try other things. And what I found for me was that it did challenge me, and it made me think totally differently about stories, which is why when I found Fate, I was like, holy crap, I don't have to tell like a medieval fantasy story every time. I can tell a story about Anchorman. I can tell a story about sentient appliances. And for me, when I go to build those games, I'm interested in story and character development. It's where I live. It's where my home base is. So I want to bring people to the table that they don't have to be actors, but are interested in diving into story that brings that character to the, character and character building to the forefront.
Okay, that's a good answer.
And D&D can be that. It can totally be that. Like I'm finding that with the little things, right? It is that. But I find it even more so when I step out of a really serious realm and I do what I'm great at, which is sharing laughs with people and making people feel comfortable sharing and laughs together. So I want to be able to have a place where we can play Anchorman and where we can play, these kinds of things. So I like the laughs piece of it and the sharing in a very collaborative based story for character building.
Makes sense. Don, what about you?
I think for me, my home games, because I do come from a theater background, and all my friends are theater people in my real life. People that I'm around.
Which is okay, by the way. Let me not hammer theater people. I'm just saying.
No, we're really the worst, though.
They are, as all of us being theater people.
I can tell you.
Right damn now, theater people.
Yeah, there's theater people.
But our home games were very dramatic, and I like exploring nuanced characters as a DM. I approach it a lot in the way that if I directed a stage show, I would approach as a director. I ask a lot of questions of my players because I want to get their brains turning in maybe directions that they didn't come in. They came in with whatever idea they had, whatever story they wanted to tell. I have to listen to them, and I love doing this. Listen to them and help them tell their story, but also see if, hey, maybe if you think about things this way, you might find something different. And that's the nature of the improv-based play that I really enjoy, usually with darker stories. I love the horror genre, and I really love dark fantasy. I grew up, with swords and sorcery. Like dark swords and sorcery was probably my favorite genre as a kid, and has continued to be one of my favorite genres as I've gotten older. So for that, D&D is great. But because of the tabletop community growing in the way it has and me being introduced to it, like Chelsea, I've been introduced to a lot of games that I didn't know existed. I'd heard of Dungeon World, and I'd seen it played, and it wasn't really my thing. But then some of the other Powered by the Apocalypse games I loved. I'd never played Call of Cthulhu, which is ridiculous. I never played it before. I did Encounter Roleplay, and that system's not perfect, but it introduced me to a way of thinking about games that I hadn't previously. And I think what I look for is I want to tell a meaningful story most of the time. I want to tell a meaningful story and help everybody else around me tell a meaningful story, whether I'm a player or a GM. And the improv-based play, when everybody's listening to each other and everybody's helping each other, can do that. And then games but I also enjoy games where I can, it's just comedy and people are just trying to laugh. I like those too. And I also enjoy games where people are doing, map combat and people are thinking about strategy. I enjoy those, but what do I really look for? At the end of the day, if I can consider myself different or in a different way, or the people in my lives in a different way because of a story that I told with friends, I think that's the best.
Yeah, and the storytelling thing, people on my channel will be shocked that I like stories and writing them. What is that quill below my window? Yeah, the storytelling is where it's at. And I think the reason I asked that question, I'm glad both of you answered it the way you did, is I think everyone has got something which is going to be their point of emphasis. And we do need to get out of our comfort zone, but that does not mean that we need to become all DMs to all people, all game masters to all people, run all games for all people. It means that we need to be willing to broaden out what games and we are willing to play and what stories we're willing to tell, but not, I think, to become something we don't want to. Like, for example, I am not a fan of horror. I just not my thing. I don't like being scared, frankly. And I don't like gory stuff. And it just is not generally my thing. Although having said that, I've been having a blast playing Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft because I do like spooky. I do like gothic spooky. I do like Edgar Allan Poe. And I like pumpkins and dark leaves and mysterious things in the distance and shadows. I like that. I just don't like, and then everyone dies, Blair Witch Switch project, you know, like, and there's obviously a big line between, there's a big gap between those two areas.
That's interesting.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's different, I mean, again, and I'm not in any way trying to oversimplify it. Like, I'm fully aware that there are multiple, and I have many friends who write wonderful books of horror. So it's not in any way a value judgment. It's not my bag. So I don't want to run, I'm not going to run a game of Cthulhu because it's not my deal, because I just don't, it's just not my thing. It's a system that I don't want to spend time in. And I probably am not likely to do that about post-apocalyptic stuff either, because I don't really like post-apocalyptic stuff personally. So my running a game like that is not going to be helpful.
Me either. That's why I did it with appliances.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. All right. Because I like the idea that appliances are always in a post-apocalypse, because they're always being hunted by humans to do stuff, right? Like, always find me my toaster. Like, it's always just post-apocalypse. No, but like, you know, like I look at those systems and I think, I look at those and I think it's really cool that people can do them, but it's not my bag, and that's fine. What's not fine, I think, is to be so limited that you refuse to, as you said, you know, almost you found yourself falling into a little bit of this rut, Dot, early on, of just D&D all the time, and that, or just whatever, like just this one limited version of something. That's probably not so good. So there's got to be a middle ground there where you can branch out, but you will always have, as you said, your home base, your point of emphasis, the thing that you love, which, like you too, I am about story, and I want to tell story and build community through story. And I think communication and community are enormously important in real life and in games. So anything that involves story building, I'm good with, so long as it doesn't involve things that depress the hell out of me, like post-apocalypse or horror. But in general, I'm open to other things. So I think it's important then, since this is a show, to help hopefully other people that are looking into the game mastering thing to find those things that you find most valuable. And it might be, you might find puzzles to be the thing that is most enjoyable for you. The solving of puzzles as a group is the most valuable thing that you do. And in that case, there are many things that will solve that. I was looking at I assume both of you have heard of this Reach of Titan Kickstarter that Grant Ellis was doing or whatever. This thing, which funded $67,000, by the way, with 1,100 people. This is really cool because it basically, for those of you who don't know what it is going to be a role-playing game about battling these massive creatures. So essentially, Shadow the Colossus, the role-playing game, which to me is awesome, because I'm like, Shadow of the Colossus was one of the greatest games ever.
Right.
Like so I'm all about it. I think that's great. And it may be that those kinds of more puzzle-oriented things are the things that you sort of want to direct your play towards. Or you may want something that's very freeform and very narrative and very flowy. Or you may want something that is just goofball all the time and is just laughable and is like Honey Heist or something like that, right? And that's all cool. I mean, all of that is good, but I think you need to know what your home base is going to be.
Well, and for me as a player and a GM, I'm different. What I want to GM and what I want to play is
interesting.
Actually different.
Interesting, yeah.
And I think I want to make that differentiation, because I think as a GM, what we are facilitators. We're world builders and facilitators, right? The worlds I love to build are ridiculous and silly. Appliances, Anchorman, right? And I love leading people through that. But as a player, I actually quite enjoy things like VTM, where I'm playing a horrific human, like a horrific undead.
Yeah.
Where I'm doing horrible things, where the depth of the story is really deep. So again, I think for me as a GM, I look for something different than when I'm looking to be a player. Yeah,
that's interesting. Do you find, is that true for you too, Don? That you look for different things as a player and a GM or not?
And I guess it's all about balance too, especially if you play a number of games a week. There's only a certain amount of creative energy for dark places that I feel like you can expend, or at least I can expend, before I'm not bringing authenticity to whatever I'm doing.
Right.
So I like horror and I like depressing stories. That's me. I get a catharsis out of that. But only to a certain point. So I always have to have games that I know are going to lighten my mood. As a GM or as a DM, I enjoy I enjoy equally running D&D and running other systems. As a player, I think I prefer playing mechanically D&D when it's with when it's in person. Over stream, I actually prefer. I actually prefer other games, because I feel like D&D requires a little extra work, and there's some things you can do with D&D to make it a little easier on the viewers and on the other players if you do theater of the mind. I like to use always average damage, unless I'm rolling like a dragon breath or something, something very, very special I can do to kind of speed the game up. But yeah, I think that for me, in person when I'm sitting around a table. I love playing D&D. Otherwise, I kind of like playing other games better.
Oh wow, this is like fired up like 6 questions in my mind about other topics that we don't have time for that we'll have to come back to. That's really cool. That's good though.
Well, we do this every month.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have more things, right? Dot to think about. All right. Well, so let me ask this because theater of the mind. Yeah, this of course the dirty little secret is whenever we're like we prefer to do theater of the mind. That's subtext. We prefer to do not preparing maps.
Not
building maps. Just kidding. That's not true. We're totally committed. No, we're not kidding. It's partial. It's sort of true. The only thing is like we also try to be very careful about our theater of the mind stuff. So we really try to keep straight in our head where everybody is kind of placed in space, which by the way, quick side note, is extremely good practice as a writer. Being able to have in your mind where people are in space when you're blocking out a fighting scene, a combat scene, is enormously helpful. So it's one thing that's actually good practice for the writing side of things, the sort of pure writing fiction, let's say, and not necessarily game related stuff that D&D can kind of do. But anyway, so many cool topics, and we don't have time to get into them because we have to get on to last couple things. So first of all, excuse me, is about the product review. And before I get there, I'll just quickly say that all of you are watching episode 16 of Masters of the Dungeon. I am joined as always by Little Red Dot, who is the regular on the show. Dave, by the way, the Digital Dungeon Master, will be back with us on our next show. He was not able to be here the last 2 because of schedule conflicts, but he will be back with us in our next show. And we're also joined, of course, by @Donathan Fry, Don, who is with us and has been an awesome conversation during his appearance here as a guest. So now let's talk a little bit about this product review. So this idea basically is just if you have a product that is something that you've bought lately, and it can be anything from like a set of dice that you love to a system that you've been trying that you're like, this is really awesome, or an adventure, or a digital product that you've been trying that is just really sweet. Anything like that you want to highlight, this is a time to be able to do something like that. So I will start with whoever has something that they...
You start. Let me get my hard copy. You start.
Okay, go ahead, Don. I'm gonna throw it on you then.
Sure, yeah. It's not something I've bought, but it's something I read recently because it was released for free, and now it's got my brain turning, talking about D&D and when do you want D&D, when do you want something else. There is an upcoming campaign setting coming out, independently published, not through Wizards, called Odyssey of the Dragon Lords.
Oh yeah, I heard about this.
You guys heard about this?
Yeah.
So I'm very, very interested in this, and they released a free 28-page player guide that I read through, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. This is I'm all for this. But it's written by a lot of the ex-head writers from BioWare, people who worked on Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, Dragon Age, Neverwinter Nights, Knights of the Old Republic. Their hit list in video games is like some of my favorite role-playing video games ever.
Yep.
And they're writing a D&D campaign setting together. It's basically dark Greek mythology, where the player characters are deitic, like Herculean, and there are titans and gods, and the gods have personality, and there's drama, interpersonal drama between the gods. And it kind of also reminds me of Dragonlance and Dragon Age at the same time. So It's a interesting idea, and I was very impressed by their free book that's out right now. So if you look up Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, you can download their 28-page thing, get a sense for it for yourself. But that's an example where absolutely for them, I think D&D is the right system. I'm glad that they made that choice because what they're doing with it is really, really top notch.
That's really neat. And we should also, by the way, highlight and praise the fact that this is happening more and more often. This sort of free rule set, Esper Genesis did this also, the free rule set that people look at, which gets them interested in it. And then obviously, because this is what we do, we want to go and get the full thing. So we want to get the core manual, or we want to get whatever the full rule book is. That is a good idea all the way around. It allows you to play one-shots quickly. It makes it much easier for people who want to stream this on Twitch. And it really is a good way to sort of build goodwill as well among your audience. So yeah, good on them for actually doing it that way. Dot, you have something that is of the product review variety?
So I think last time I told you guys we got really big into like GM-less games, like the new fad of GM-less games.
Yep.
But my favorite GM-less game, I finally got my hard copy of Die Laughing, and I'm so excited. I have forced everybody to play it with me since then. So you too can go get your hard copy. I think he's running a sale right now on both the soft cover, the hardcover, and then you get the PDF version. But if you like GM-less games, this one's a shit ton of fun because you get to create a B-rated horror movie. The whole thing is like pre-packaged. You choose from the very like stereotypical. I'm gonna show you guys some of the pages. Like this one's like the parent, the slut, the cheerleader. So you choose from like very stereotypical people of your horror movies, and then everybody works together to choose your monster. This one says the rabid werewolf, the reanimated melty bug blob thing, self-aware monkeys with guns. The sexy vampire, just like ridiculous horror movie things. And you play through, and there's no GM. You play with 66, and the whole idea is to kill off everyone. There's no prep for it. So the goal is to get everybody dead. And as your character dies, you then become a producer. And the producers have points that they pass out that allow you to basically do things like, oh, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to redo that scene without that prop. We had a budget cut, things like that. So it's very meta, just a ton of fun. And I have never played a game where we were not in like absolute stitches by the end of it. So yeah, it's just fantastic. So anyways, I highly recommend this. This is written by a great friend. And I think last time I talked about the game Capers too, the 1920s one, the gangsters with superpowers. A superpowered game of gangsters in the roaring 20s. So these are written by one of my great friends here in Atlanta. And this one actually just won an award, and I'm playing through it actually again right now on another channel. So those are two, but one that I don't have in hand that just got done with a Kickstarter that I'm very excited about, and maybe my next run on my channel, is something called Turn. Which is a really fun little game. It's called Turn, a tabletop game of shapeshifters in small towns. It's one of these kind of like feel-goody, cutesy type things where everybody plays shapeshifters in a small town, and you have two characters. You have your like normal character and then your shifted animal version, and you have to keep it on the DL. Yeah, here we go. Shapeshifters in small rural towns who struggle between their beast and human side in a quiet drama while trying to find balance and community.
I just found it just now, the Kickstarter for it. That I love. That is the best. A slice of life supernatural role-playing game with quiet drama about shapeshifters in small rural towns. How great a pitch line is that? Oh my God.
I immediately
also, Netflix, make that series today. Today. Make it today.
It's written by, it's written by, so you'll probably know them on Twitter. They're wonderful. They're very supportive of the LGBTQ community. I'm very excited about this game. Like, I'm so excited. I missed the Kickstarter deadline, so I'm going to have to just do my pre-order and wait like everybody else. But I'm really excited about it, and maybe my next run for my channel, because it screams Little Red Dot. Like, it absolutely, coming from a small town, it screams my name. It's calling for me to run a swamp, like a tiny town in a swamp.
That is super cool. Yeah, that's again, that's an example of these games are coming out. There's another one that came out recently called Volcania, which is basically like a full up steampunk RPG that I'm just like, please give me more of the steampunk RPG, please. That's directed. So anyway, that's cool. The one that I want to mention very quickly, because I saw Shadowed Mage mention it, because I didn't actually have anything I was going to bring up this time. I've had one for the last 15 episodes in a row, but I do have one that I want to mention that I'm excited about because of what it implies, and that is Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which is going to be released by Wizards. Now, the reason this is important is not only that it's, again, people go, oh my God, they're going back into their files and they're repackaging. Well, yeah, but here's why it matters. Because it is set not in the Forgotten Realms, but it is set in Greyhawk. Now, as someone who considers Ed Greenwood a good friend and is himself has had work published by Ed Greenwood, I would never disparage the Forgotten Realms. But I think it's fair to say that we've done a whole metric goddamn ton of work in the Forgotten Realms, and I think, which is why when I saw anything about Eberron, I'm like, yes, thank God, something. Not just because Eberron, but because not Forgotten Realms for change. Greyhawk is really, really cool too, and the thought that they may actually be looking and teasing this out as a system which is not going to replace Forgotten Realms, which I think is great. It's not going to get rid of it, but I think having something else to fit alongside it, along with what you folks mentioned before, Dark Sun, I mentioned Eberron, My Love, Dragonlance, these sorts of things. There's no reason that these systems cannot exist alongside of each other over time, and having the opportunity for Wizards to start supporting that more actively, where we're dealing with gods like Ayuz and all this stuff that we got from the Greyhawk world. I still have the old Greyhawk Gazetteer from 1979 or whatever. This was really great, powerful stuff that was really intriguing and interesting, and has survived really only as like convention oriented stuff. So having stuff that's going back to it, going back to that setting is really interesting if that's what they end up doing. So I'm rooting for things like Saltmarsh because I want to be able to see more of those systems, because it's just more, it's more stuff, it's more stuff for the table, right? It's more parts of the buffet. It's more things we can choose from as GMs, and it's more stuff that we can add into the mix. So
I've been waiting to see. I've been taking bets with a friend of how long it was going to take him to start tapping into Greyhawk stuff. I was like, the next one will be Greyhawk.
Yeah, it seems like at some point they've got to. It's just, there's enough people that are interested in it. So we will see. All right. Well, so we have a few minutes left with these wonderful guests, and this gives us a chance to actually have a few questions from chat. So, chat, as always, we will give you a chance to ask questions of either Dot or Don or myself regarding game mastering, dungeon mastering questions, or anything relating to what we talked about today. Or if you have a particular issue, like how do I solve X problem, please, leave out the names to protect the innocent. But anything like that would be useful. All you need to do is type in question in all caps and then your question in chat, and then we will answer them as many as we can. Sometimes we get only a few, and sometimes we get a ton, but we'll answer as many as we can, and now is the time. So type it in and let's go. And as far as Open Legend is concerned, because we ran Open Legend on this channel also, and they were actually a sponsor of my charity con a couple years ago. I think Open Legend is still floating around a little bit, but I think Brian Feister, who was the creator of Open Legend, kind of went in a different direction with life and is doing a bunch of other stuff. And so that unfortunately meant that had a big kind of meteoric rise and then has not had as much follow through, which I think is too bad, because I think Open Legend, from what I saw of it, was a pretty interesting system that had some really good stuff, but it needs more long-term support than what you're going to get over just a quick, year or 2 year sort of window. So I hope that they get back into it and they can produce it more. And there are some people still playing it, but given what it was aiming for, as you just brought up, Ed Greenwood and Matt Mercer and everything, I like it. I would like to see more stuff from them that was more support from the company generally, and I'm not sure that that's there at the moment, but we will see. You would like to hear opinions on Dark Sun and that style of world play. Well, no one here likes Dark Sun. No, I will allow.
We all hate that game. I freaking love it.
I will allow both Dot and Don to hold forth on why Dark Sun is awesome. Go ahead. To describe what makes it awesome. Either one of you can tell us why it's great. And also, I guess, is there anything that would change about how you ran a game associated with that as a setting, besides the obvious that it's not Dragonlance?
One of my favorite one-shots I ever played actually was with Grant Ellis, and he ran a Dark Sun hack for 5e. And it was great. I'll say that for now, and then I'm going to let Jonathan finish that off.
Okay.
Yeah.
I for years, when it was hard to meet with people to play tabletop role-playing games, I did a lot of growing up from a child onto just a few years ago when I sort of stopped of MUDs, text-based RPGs.
Sure.
And specifically, there's a genre that's was very role-play, permanent death, just like a normal TTRPG, like Dungeons and Dragons. And there's a game that was Dark Sun, and I played that game so much. I remember the old Gold Box video games. And I remember the Dark Sun box video game where you start out as a gladiator and you fight. It had this, but the world itself, that desert feel with monsters that are so huge and so inhuman, how dangerous it was. I like being challenged, and like I've mentioned, I like the mechanics of D&D. That's my favorite part of the system is the actual combat. And Dark Sun always, for me, did that really well. It was very threatening. Everything always felt like there was cause and consequence. I like dark fantasy, and I like the Dark Sun in that world. The powers that be were so powerful that if you tried to fight the power, they stomped on you.
Right.
It's all about, just like with Cyberpunk, it's a game about fighting the power, even if you...
It's like Shadowrun in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like Shadowrun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like Dark Sun. It's similar. It's that concept of the world is set on scarcity and sparsity instead of being very full and rich.
Yep.
So it changes the way that you have to make choices and the way that you make your characters and the things that drive them to make decisions they make. I don't know ever in a Dark Sun campaign that I've ever played where we've been like, let's go get the treasure. Ever has been about gold or riches, or taverns and that kind of thing. Dark Sun is about surviving the world you live in. It's harsh, and as Jonathan said, it's dangerous. And there's something really satisfying, I think, as a player for me to be in a world like that. One of my favorite characters I've ever made, actually, that inspired the character I'm playing in the Emberwind game right now, my druid, which was a voodoo, like a witch doctor type character that literally took the skulls of everything. That was the treasure. How many skulls can I take? Right, which is a totally different mindset as to why things are killed and the valuable thing in their life. So like, I know that sounds so ridiculous, but there is this aspect for me of the danger and the scarcity that make it so interesting.
One of the things that also works with that, and I think this is similar with games like Numenera, is that there is a kind of fundamental strangeness about the world for most of us that I think when you lean into it, really can make a big difference there. I remember listening to one of the Acquisitions Incorporated podcasts where Jerry Holkins was running a Dark Sun campaign, or, one shot basically, and it described this moment where there's this big sandstorm, and basically as the sandstorm is going, it's revealing this enormous like bone cage that it turns out they had taken shelter in, and so they're like walking down this bone cage, which has been like shaped into steps, and I'm just like, everything about that is awesome. Like you had me at bone cage, like that and that sort of thing is really, really neat. So it's kind of the strangeness of it, and I don't mean strangeness in a disparaging way in the least. I mean something which is really engaging in a way that we wouldn't normally have it. So there's one other question that Wily Hobbit had as well, which is curious about how you organize yourself to DM a game, 3x5 cards, software, how do you organize your content, etc. And that is a good question that is partially dependent, I suppose, on the game we play, but I will throw that to our two guests. How do you set, Don, I guess I'll start with you because you talked about loving the prep. When you are prepping, are there sort of go-tos that you definitely, you have, I don't know, Post-it notes, or you're using Microsoft Word documents, or like how digital / in reality sort of physical stuff are you using to organize? What's your process to kind of get ready for something?
It used to be a mix of Word documents and Post-it notes and maps and all these things. Kind of like, I create, I didn't really use a DM screen, but I created like my own sort of spread visually laid out so that like I knew I could bounce from the narrative beats that I was interested in exploring to the open world information that I had over here very easily. I do this now, but I do it all digitally at this point, and I use Google Documents, and I have two monitors, which is great for D&D because I can break things into different windows, and I can have my window here. That's all of my NPC stats or all of my. I use the program Padlet, which I love. It's free. You can check it out. Padlet does like really good thought bubble, think like conspiracy theory style boards, which I use for like cause and consequence, right? I use for narrative possibilities.
Neat.
Just as organizational thing. But then I also keep a script, and I literally like for May Black Roses Bloom, which is like my prep heaviest game right now. I have a script as I think it will go. Of course, it never stays on script, but in terms of like what scenes I think are going to happen, here are the scenes that I think are going to happen. Here are the because people use music, and if you stream, you also sometimes use overlay camera cues. Like we'll move between a one-on-one scene with one person and then a group scene, and I gotta cue all that in. So I want to make sure that I have that prepared as well as I can. So I do it through different windows, and I don't think any one game has ever looked the same. When I run Monster of the Week, it looks entirely different. But I do think a lot ahead of time about how do I want to visually arrange things so that I'm anticipating what my players are going to do as well as you can, because they're going to go off and do what you least expect them to do.
Before Dot answers, I just want to make one quick note. That's true. When you talked about monitors, so I have 3 monitors, and you never go back. More monitors are so good. So much space, so much real estate. I cannot even describe how useful it is to have so much real estate to just look and be like, I want this over here. Your narrative thread is over here. Like, it's just like, oh man, I just, whenever I go back and I'm just using my laptop and I'm kind of like, I don't know where anything goes anymore. Anyway, it was cracking me up. Yeah. Monitors, man. Multiple monitors is where it's at. Dot, what about you? How do you prepare and kind of do things?
Well, if you have never watched my streams, I'm definitely an improv GM most of the time. Now I will have a story set, but a lot of my notes look like things like for the little things right now, because it's so imagery heavy, I just make bullet points of things that I want to hit. Color red. She wears a crimson coat, right? So I hit the big things because I find that if I over prepare, I actually get more nervous, and my characters never hit it. So I'd rather build the world very open. So I'll have a quick list of locations and a quick list of NPCs that may get brought up. But all in all, there are very few games where I'm going to hard plot. Now, occasionally I get a little saucy. Here, I have my whiteboard back here. I'll show you guys my
Ooh, check it out.
Some prep happening here. I do this a lot if I'm going to like straight up write a module, which this is how my brain functions. But I don't always go that route. A lot of the time, my game prep for my players is just a Pinterest board. And I'll categorize my Pinterest board down that's like, here's aesthetic, here's location inspiration, things like that. I did it for the little things. I think that there was actually a category in that Pinterest board. It tickled me so much. It was like, bigger's not always better, which was just images of children in spaces where they looked small, trying to reach things at counters and stuff like that. So I'm an imagery-based person. So both my notes and the way that I feed information to my players oftentimes is very, very imagery-based. So I try not to, I guess, over-prepare or over-prep. But then there are the times where you just have to. Like my notes for the Anchorman campaign, where I went and did historical research on what radio stations and news stations were in Philadelphia in the 1970s. Like I actually pulled a list and I used them as reference points. Like I didn't have to make that crap up. It's out there. You just got to go pull it off Wiki.
Yeah.
Like there's no prep for that.
Yeah.
And I referenced an actual radio station that was the Rock Station in 1970 XYZ in Philadelphia. So it just kind of, I think it really, for me, depends. For something like the Fate of the Appliance Wars, I could not do anything but prepare a world. All I could do was say, here is what the world is like. Humans are radioactive and appliances now are sentient. Everything else is up to you. You have a goal, which is to reach the coastline and hop ship onto this giant junk island that's floating up the Atlantic coast. Go. And then everything between there, it really was like, here are the ideas I have for a world. I can't prep when they're going to hit X, Y, and Z. They may never hit X, Y, and Z. So it just, the way my games usually run, if I over prep, I find that it is more of a hindrance. So I just have my quick notes, my images, my imagery. And I, as the storyteller and the facilitator, just try to weave that into what my players are giving me.
Yeah, I agree that over prep is dangerous. And part of that is a feel thing. You know, I think when you first start, you have a tendency to very much prep absolutely every conceivable scenario. And then over time, what you realize, as we've said multiple times tonight, is that there is no way to prepare for every conceivable scenario because no plan survives contact with the player. So it means that your story is going to go in a very different direction. And that is when you embrace that and when you recognize that this really is collaborative storytelling, that has a really profound effect, I think, on the way that you go about playing it. So for me, I am very much a text guy. So I do a lot of my notes through that. And I have a lot of sort of bullet point notes about, bring in this. When I get backstory stuff, and this is why session zeros and backstories are so important. When I get backstories from players, I always have moments like that, which after sessions, and even in the days between sessions, I will go back to and think about threads that I can pull up and say, this is a thread that I want to be able to pull into this particular adventure. I want to be able to kind of spotlight this player, talk about this player, connect these two players. And I can do that with just little bits of notes, largely because I've set it up, I hope, such that my players will take the ball and run with it from there. If I use backstory that has been given to me by a player, I don't need to go in enormous detail about you've met this person and here's this thing and where's what they do and all this stuff. Kat Rambo, who plays in my Aspergenesis campaign, had told me about this character, Tazora Markley, I think, who was this kind of this Denduzi in Aspergenesis, kind of this alien race that was always getting into trouble and was always causing problems. And so when she shows up again, she actually didn't even remember the name at first. And then I started describing it, and she's like, "Holy crap, that's who it is!" Like she had forgotten that she had added this as part of the backstory. And at that point, then I could just let her go because she's like, "This is typical, like the time you showed up in this bar." And I was like, "That certainly wasn't in the backstory she gave me to begin with." But it was great because in her mind, she had invested all of this story about what this person was and this character. So having them being able to provide their own fill in the gaps for you in a way means that it's a much more rich interaction with your NPC, and it's being driven by the experience of emotional connections for their players, because the reality is that you want your NPCs to have life and veracity, yes, but you want them to have life and veracity because of what that sparks in your players, right? Because you do not want to be the big star all the time showing off all these awesome NPCs, and you don't want the players to kind of fade in the background and watch as you're doing this kind of vaudeville act. You want them to be coming forward and playing the adventure so that they are the players. Your skill at doing this means that you will still, trust me, get plenty of time on stage, time that you're noticed. Your world is what's motivating them in the first place. Believe me, you're not going to vanish, but you will not be the leader bringing the little children up, through the sort of dangerous crowd. You will be instead taking the children and just sort of gently pushing them and saying, you go do it, which is what you want them to do. You want them making up the stories. So having the ability to know what their backstory is and then just kind of keeping it in little documents that I have, sometimes even just notepad documents, honestly, or Microsoft Word, that is something which I find very helpful.
It was one of the... God, NPCs are hard because I love playing NPCs. Like, I'm a total NPC whore. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. And with this little things campaign, these goblins, I had no plan on them being. They were supposed to kill these goblins. Well, when they befriended the goblins, they had to get a personality, and they're sitting around a campfire, and the kids were like, "Oh, what do we give for a story?" So out there on the internet somewhere is me telling the Three Little Goblins, which is the story of the Three Little Pigs as replaced with goblins, which didn't become a thing because, of course, the whole moral of the story is build your house out of stone because it is grounded and structured, and the goblins gave them this whole big piece of knowledge, which of course is like 2 minutes of me talking in ridiculous goblin voice, which oftentimes I would agree with you overshadowed the characters. But when they woke up the next morning and the goblins were dead, they chose, instead of burying them, to give them a rock burial.
Oh, that's
to like
sweet.
tie into it,
That's sweet,
and
yeah.
it was this really great moment where I watched my players tap into like this NPC, and it did what you're talking about, which is inspired them to be deeper. and better.
100%, absolutely, and what you're talking about is completely fine. That actually, what you're talking about is setting up the groundwork to allow them to then flourish.
Yeah.
It's not to
Yes.
make characters that are flat. It's to not make them more heroically important than the players themselves, but you're not
Yes.
doing that by having them sort of hold forth on this. That just means that the stakes then, right? Like when so-and-so then dies, like this character Magric that betrayed my players in the AME session, they hated Magric. Oh my God, did they want to kill Magric? Because they thought they had connected with him and they were talking about his dad and blah, 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 blah. And then he turns out to betray them. How do you do this? So anyway, that sense of letting the players kind of invest the world with themselves is powerful. But also powerful is the fact that we are running out of time. And so we need to make sure that we kind of close up here. So this is a great discussion, as I knew it would be. And it was really fun to be able to kind of banter back and forth with two very experienced GMs and players. And this is why I love doing the show. And if you liked it, you should follow all of them and talk to all of them. And I'll let them explain themselves in a minute. And you should also make sure that you follow us here on my channel and also support us with the Patreon so that we continue to build and do more things of this kind, like Masters of the Dungeon, which has now been running for 1.5 years plus. So with guests like Donathan Fry and others. And I will start, as I usually do, with the guest star. So Don, thank you. Really interesting stuff, as I knew would be the case. Where can the fine folks sort of find you next in terms of shows and things like that being done on the Twitches or elsewhere?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. It was great to have this talk. I love talking about this stuff, especially when the intersection of game and story is really the crux of the conversation, because that's the reason I'm not doing theater anymore. The reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because theater didn't give me half of what I love, and this gives me both sides. And so this is a great conversation.
Yay.
So you can find me on Twitter at Donathan Fry. I'll tweet about the things that I do. Where you can see me Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. May Black Roses Bloom. That is my Dark Dragonlance campaign. It is an ode to Dragonlance, but it doesn't try to live in the same world. It's kind of an alternate Dragonlance, but it does have Raceland. It does have Lorana. It has all the characters. But their endings and what's going to happen to them is not written. It's not matching the canon story because time travel is a thing. So if you're interested in that, that's Wednesday nights at Tales from the Grim, the channel that I work on with Greg, which if you guys know Greg, he's an awesome dude. He's in the show. He plays a knight. He's amazing. Also, a couple of podcasts that I do. Tentacles Pod. We just started our second season. This is our Tomes and Tentacles Call of Cthulhu podcast with Ben Counter, who's a fantastic novelist, a really good keeper for Call of Cthulhu. You can follow that at Tentacles Pod on Twitter. And then at Dice Tribe is my family-friendly dinosaur fuel adventure in Shul. So this is like the exact opposite of everything else I do a family-friendly podcast. It's really, really good. I do it with my fiance and my friends from Columbus who are all theater people. And so that's at Dice Tribe on Twitter. Those are the three things I'm doing right now that I like to shout out. But just thank you guys again for having me on the show today.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much, Don. I appreciate it very much. Dot, where will the fine folks see you next here on the Twitch's world?
Yeah, Twitch, Twitter, _red_dot. If you are new to me, I play a lot of tabletop RPGs. That's long and short and tell a lot of stories. So every other Monday, you can catch me in the probably longest Princess of the Apocalypse campaign that has ever existed ever. So
it's a long apocalypse, long tail.
It has been a long ass apocalypse. You can catch me on Nerd Immersion's channel playing on that every other Monday. Tuesdays right now, I'm over on Unmade Gaming's channel playtesting actually Emberwind, which has been really, really cool. That's where I took my character Cathbad is an inspiration from that Dark Suns character.
Cathbad's a lot of fun as a character, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, poor Johnny had no idea what he was getting into. That table. Wednesdays, you can catch me on the North by Northwest podcast. That is my little D&D 5e home. So we're on volume 3, what will be a 5-volume podcast. So check that out. My Wednesdays during this month are free, praise be. My evenings are for reals, open Thursdays. Thursdays is when the little things happens. You can catch me over on Pro Restarter's channel in the evenings. I believe that's 8 p.m. Right now, my Fridays are in flux, but you'll catch me here a Friday this month.
Yes.
Playing through our assignment. What is it?
Assignment Unpossible. Unpossible.
Right,
yes.
Unpossible. And I'll be here for that. And then my Saturdays are super full right now. I have one more campaign of the Capers RPG over on Roll For It's channel, and then I play in a 4-hour every Saturday, most intense Vampire the Masquerade that has ever existed ever. It's so super intense, but it's my favorite, and I get to wear dreadlocks, so...
And she actually did that just before this, so a trooper as always.
And I think that's it. Oh, and Sundays you can catch me right now on my channel, a couple Sundays out of the month running my community game where I introduce people to D&D called Sunday Fun Days, where I drink a shit ton of mimosas and we play ridiculous, high fantasy level Dungeons and Dragons.
It's good stuff. As always, this was a great pleasure. Thank you so much to both Dot and to Don. I will see Dot both at Assignment Impossible and elsewhere. Of course, Dot also now, by the way, regular member of the Art Vocalist, so you will see her back on the voiceover stuff, doing awesome things with Banner Saga and learning more about Ditch and why he's depressing. Oh my God, that was the funniest. Anyway, you'll see her doing that, and of course, we will hope to see Don. I'm going to again be trying to check out May Black Roses Bloom and all the other stuff that he does. So again, Don, thank you. Dot, thank you. And chat, can we get some love for the wonderful guest today and participants in this stream? And I will see you later. Thank you, Don and Dot again. Okay. So that is going to do it for that. But that is not going to do it for me, because now we have got D&D coming up, and we have got, if you liked what we saw, and by the way, thank you, Wiley Hobbit, for the kind words. I appreciate it. If you like what you saw and you're like, how do I see some of these things in action in terms of these amazing players? Stick around, because we are now going to be moving on to Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to stop the recording of this so I can make sure that that's clear. Then I'm going to start the recording, and I will actually be having about a 5-minute break while I get things ready and try to stuff my face frantically so I can have energy to do the stream that we're about to have. And then we'll be back after that. So I will be back to you folks in just about 5 minutes. Please stick around. Let people know about this, because we are going to be continuing D&D with Infinity and Beyond coming up just a second. I will see you in just a bit. Hold tight.
picture here. Why won't you